Today we're going to look at some of the fun stories, wordplay, and characters behind some well-known jazz standards. Stick around to the end for a lesser-known one that I had to do some internet sleuthing to come up with some good theories for. Jazz composers are obviously very creative, brilliant individuals, and oftentimes their creativity went beyond the music itself and into the titles of their compositions. We often use the term jazz standard to refer to any of the popular songs that have been recorded over the decades by many musicians. Well-known songs like Fly Me to the Moon, Autumn Leaves, but I like to differentiate between the American Songbook and jazz compositions. American Songbook standards, aka Tin Pan Alley songs, typically began life as show tunes, ragtime rags, or swing tunes for dance bands. They were often extracted from early 20th century musicals and modified as improvisational vehicles by jazz musicians who would play the melody and then improvise over the chord progression. The most famous composers of these tunes would include George and Ira Gershwin, Rodgers and Hart, Cole Porter, Gus Kahn, and many others. On the other hand, I like to use the term jazz compositions for songs written by the musicians who would record them. There aren't many famous jazz musicians who weren't also composers. Everyone from Louis Armstrong and John Coltrane to Michael Brecker and Pat Metheny were well versed in American songbook standards, but also wrote their own music from scratch. Many of these songs would go on to become the types of standards that other musicians would memorize, record, and call at jam sessions. Now, these songs by jazz composers typically have titles that are evocative of places, people they knew, or use some clever wordplay related to an interesting topic. This brings us to our first group of song title origins, which is songs named after people. Moose the Mooch was supposedly named after a guy named Emery Moose the Mooch Bird, not to be confused with Charlie Parker himself, who was an LA-based salesman of, let's just say, contraband that Charlie Parker was seeking after. According to Ross Russell, Charlie Parker actually ended up signing over half of his royalties from the Dial record label to Bird for this desired substance. Interestingly, Duke Ellington had earlier written a song entitled The Mooch, which he explained referred to mooching around or walking around with little purpose. Cab Calloway famously recorded the song Minnie the Moocher, a song heavily laden with references, loosely based on Willie the Weeper. So we have Willie the Weeper, Minnie the Moocher, The Mooch, and Moose the Mooch. Another Bird tune, Billy's Bounce, was supposedly named for Charlie Parker and Roy Eldridge's agent, Billy Shaw. Now, Billy Shaw spelled his name with a Y, which is the typical masculine spelling, while IE is typically reserved as a feminine spelling, and some speculate that this may actually have been named for Billy Shaw's secretary, Billy, with the same name, but spelled with the IE. John Coltrane's famous minor blues, Mr. PC, was named after Paul Chambers, who played on John Coltrane's record Giant Steps, as well as Oliver Nelson's The Blues and the Abstract Truth, and countless other records. Vibraphonist Milt Jackson composed Bag's Groove, a blues featured on the album of the same title by Sonny Rollins, which was named after himself. His nickname was Bags, which he supposedly got after going on a drinking binge after leaving the army. And, when you don't get enough sleep and you're living the late night club music lifestyle and you get bags under your eyes. Hey guys, if you're enjoying the video, please make sure to like and subscribe. It really helps more people see them. I make videos for musicians and music fans alike, so there's a little bit of something here for everyone. Thank you. Donna Lee, Charlie Parker's very popular contrafact over the chord progression to the earlier tune Indiana, was named after the daughter of bebop bassist Curly Russell. Curly Russell played with pretty much all of the greats of the era, including Charlie Parker himself, as well as Fats Navarro, Sonny Stitt, Stan Getz, and many others. His daughter would go on to donate his bass to the Institute of Jazz Studies at Rutgers University in 2002, which lends a lot of credibility to this story about the origin of Donna Lee. Another common device in jazz standard titles is the use of a backwards word. An excellent example of this is Sonny Rollins' Airegin, which is a really popular tune that gets called at jam sessions all the time. Airegin is, of course, Nigeria spelled backwards. While as far as I know, Sonny Rollins never toured in Nigeria, he spoke in an interview about being inspired by a photograph of Nigerian dancers, and he decided to dedicate the next tune that he wrote to them. Horace Silver would record a song entitled Ecaro in 1952 and again in 1956. In his autobiography, he would elaborate on the title. When I gigged around Connecticut with some of the other teenage musicians, we got a kick out of calling each other by our names spelled backwards. I was Ecaro. Later, when I started my own music publishing company, I named it Ecaro Music Incorporated. Emanon, or No Name spelled backwards, was the title of a tune written by Dizzy Gillespie and Milton Shaw, recorded in 1947. This title would resurface in 2018 when Wayne Shorter would borrow the title for his album Emanon. This album was actually accompanied by a more than 70-page graphic novel co-authored by Wayne Shorter himself about a rogue philosopher named Emanon who spreads a message of truth and empowerment in the fight against evil. In 1971, Miles Davis would record 2 tracks entitled Salim and Sivad on his Live Evil record, live being evil backwards. Interestingly, this would have been during the heyday of late 60s and early 70s rock albums with supposedly satanic backmasked records hidden in the tracks. So if you played the record backwards, you would hear a message. An early example of this would have been the Beatles recording Rain, recorded in 1966. And the last backwards tune name I wanted to mention is Arenel. Arenel is credited to Thelonious Monk, but it may also have been written by Sadiq Hakim and Idris Suleiman. This would make sense because it was supposedly named after an ex-girlfriend of Sadiq Hakim whose name was Lenore. And that's it for the backwards titles. So now we're getting on to one that's very well documented. This is UMMG, or Upper Manhattan Medical Group, by Billy Strayhorn. So Billy Strayhorn was a prolific composer and arranger who worked predominantly with Duke Ellington's band. This one was named to honor Dr. Arthur Logan, a Tuskegee-born physician who was not only Duke Ellington's own physician, but also a close personal friend. Logan and his wife sat in on recording sessions, attended many performances, and were generally treated as Ellington's extended family. A hospital was named in his honor in 1973 after his passing. Upper Manhattan Medical Group itself supposedly referred to a group of physicians which Dr. Logan was a member of in Harlem at the time. And he was also described as a great civic activist, and simply being a renowned black doctor in the early 20th century is remarkable in its own right, given the type of rampant racism in the medical industry at the time. I recommend The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks if you want to get some context. So all in all, just a beautiful melody, beautiful song written to commemorate a really great person. Bemsha Swing was originally copyrighted as Bemsha Swing, and Bemsha is a nickname for the island of Barbados, which is called Bemshire or Bemsha by natives. Co-composer Denzel Best had his roots in Barbados. Another monk tune, Epistrophy, was named after the word epistrophe with an altered spelling, which refers to a literary device in which a word or a phrase is repeated at the end of successive phrases or sentences. So quite a suitable name for this melody. Monk was really great with wordplay. He was a genius. And another one of his titles that's got a fun story behind it is the tune Evidence. So Evidence is based on the chord progression to the standard Just You, Just Me. Just You, Just Me is just us. Just us sounds like justice, and evidence is what leads to justice. John Coltrane's Giant Steps is based on a progression of chords which are a major third apart, as opposed to moving by fourth, which is very common in the jazz and blues idiom. We know that Coltrane was very interested in the geometry of music, and he famously drew this amazing circle which pulls together a lot of concepts out of music theory in a way that is much more sophisticated than the usual circle of fourths. And I think there's a whole lot of cool ideas to be drawn from this circle which he created and supposedly gave to Yusef Lateef. In music theory, the half step and whole step are the building blocks of harmony. So 2 half steps makes a whole step, and we refer to other intervals like major thirds and minor thirds. They can be broken down to the number of steps which complete them. This one is unsubstantiated, but my personal pet theory is that the giant steps refers to the major thirds intervals in this chord progression. Some other fun wordplay title contrafacts that John Coltrane wrote using this chord cycle, which we call Coltrane changes, is over the standard How High the Moon, which he called Satellite, the moon being a satellite of the Earth. 26-2, which is a contrafact of confirmation, and unfortunately this one, as far as anyone seems to know, is just the label stuck on the tape at the recording studio. It was supposedly the 26th take that day, which was the second day of a recording session with Coltrane. Fifth House is a Coltrane changes contrafact of the tune Hot House, which is based on what is this thing called love, and may refer to the fifth house in astrology, which relates to creativity and passion. So that one works out too. Shorter studied the music of Coltrane intently, and Fee-Fi-Fo-Fum loosely borrows some of this major third movement from giant steps. As you probably know, Fee-Fi-Fo-Fum is the phrase from the Jack and the Beanstalk story. Fun fact, a linguist named Charles Mackay has proposed that the Fee-Fi-Fo-Fum is actually a phrase in ancient Gaelic, and it translates loosely to, "Behold, food, good to eat, sufficient to satisfy my hunger." Anyway, if you made it this far, thanks for sticking with me. I've got one more really interesting one. This was one that I was unable to find in any textbooks, but I stumbled across a Google Groups message board conversation from 1995 with a bunch of interesting personalities in it. This started when a commenter named Idris Dawood would post saying, "I think that this tune was named after my father, Talib Dawood, who was another trumpet player in Philadelphia who knew Clifford Brown." Dawood and Dawood are both spellings of this name, which translates to David in Arabic. However, a week later, this is still in March of 1995, Idris would post a follow-up saying that he had found what was probably a more credible story as to the source of the title for the tune Dawood. I received this message from Karen Reege, and will accept this as the most likely explanation of Dawood over mine. Idris. Roosevelt Dawood Wardell. Spirituality and music are often said to go hand in hand, but rarely are they merged as clearly as in the essence of pianist Roosevelt Wardell. The descendant of a long line of clergymen dating back to pre-slavery Egypt, Mr. Wardell is perhaps best known by his family's spiritual name, Dawood, and as the subject of trumpeter Clifford Brown's famous composition by the same name. Mr. Wardell returned to make Wilmington his permanent home in 1978 after many years of touring with musicians such as Montan Moreland, Big Joe Turner, and Max Roach. More recently, he has worked with Roberta Flack, and thanks to a fellowship from the State Arts Council, Mr. Wardell has performed jazz throughout Delaware, including at such venues as the now-defunct Boardroom and the Grand Opera House. After a brief challenge from another poster, Karen Reg herself would chime in. The biographical information was taken from a 2-hour interview I did with Mr. Wardell in 1993. I'm a trained musicologist and understand that not every musician has accurate recollections. However, this fact can be confirmed by Robert Boise Lowry, Clifford Brown's original teacher. I'm sorry if this information is not sufficient to satisfy you. So the thread pretty much ended there, and there's no really hard evidence. Regardless of which of these stories is true, we can walk away knowing that Dawood is the Arabic spelling of the name David, and that Clifford Brown probably did know someone who went by that name. I thought it was really cool to find this, almost 30-year-old internet conversation about this topic when, we were talking about being only 20 or 30 years since the tune was actually originally recorded versus now when we're 60 years away. And if you have any more that I left out, let me know. And if you really enjoyed this video, I would be happy to do some more research and make another video about some of the origins of these song titles, because you learn so much. You learn about so many interesting people when you start to just dive into the songs. That's all for now. I hope you enjoyed, and if you'd like to support me, you can check out my music on Bandcamp or Spotify in the link below, or visit my website and see some of my educational resources there, including a PDF of really fantastic tone exercises for saxophone. You can see the video I made for that one here, and that link will also be in the description. Thank you so much, guys. Have a good one.